Thousands of migrants in the U.S. facing deportation could now find themselves being sent to a country an ocean away. Migrants like the 8 men currently being held in the East African country of Djibouti. Our government was sending them to South Sudan with less than 24 hours notice when a judge put a stop to that, saying the move violated a 15 days notice requirement. While all 8 men have been convicted of serious offenses in the U.S., anyone facing deportation, including asylum seekers, could now also be deported to a third country with limited notice and due process. That is because a Supreme Court ruling this week overturned a lower court order. That order stated that before deporting someone to a third country, a series of steps had to be taken to ensure they would not face unsafe conditions, including that 15 days notice. So what does this all mean legally? Here with us to discuss are the hosts of Crooked Media's legal podcast, Strict Scrutiny, Leah, Litman, and Kate Shaw. Also still with us is our immigration reporter, Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Thank you all for joining us. Leah, let's start with you. Now that the Supreme Court has made this order, they didn't rule themselves decisively. They just kicked it back to the lower court. So what happens now?
Well, technically what the Supreme Court did is it paused or blocked the lower court decision that had required the government to afford people notice and a meaningful opportunity to challenge their potential removal to a third country. And so what happens now is that lower court decision isn't in effect as to those individuals who are not in Djibouti. So as to those individuals, the federal court has said they are still subject to the court's supervision and requirement that they be given an opportunity to assert a credible fear of torture where they were intended to be deported. But as to everyone else, the Supreme Court has prevented the lower court from requiring the government to afford them notice and an opportunity to challenge their removal to a third country.
Leah or Kate, you know, for the last few election cycles, I've covered the voters, and you hear a lot of concern about immigration. And Kate, I'll throw this to you. So you've got these people. They've been convicted of crimes. I guess their home countries where they originally came from before overstaying or crossing illegally here don't want them back. So they broke the law twice over, but then the law was trying to protect them to keep them here. For a lot of voters, I know that's confusing. It doesn't seem to be a system working. Can you talk through that?
Well, sure. So I don't think the law actually prevents the president from implementing, immigration policy priorities. And if a harsher approach to illegal immigration is something that the voters chose, the president does have some authority, of course, to implement that policy objective. But the law sets forth certain requirements for how the president can pursue immigration policy. And one of the ways that the law protects individuals, even those who have come over illegally or who have committed crimes, as the individuals, in this litigation have, they're still subject to the protections of both domestic and international law. So there's a statute and a treaty that provides that an individual who is going to be sent to what's known as this is a third country removal, so a country to which this individual may have absolutely no connections, has an entitlement to essentially make an argument that they are afraid that they will be subject to torture or inhumane treatment before they can be sent there. And so all the lower court in this case did was essentially require the executive branch to give these individuals an opportunity to make that case. They weren't even arguing that the government lacked the power to make these removals, simply that some process needed to be afforded first. And that's what the Supreme Court intervened to say. Well, actually not to say, because there was no explanation provided, but to pause the lower court ruling that these individuals just had to have that legal process before they could be removed to these third countries.
Kate, is that odd that there was no actual opinion provided by the majority justices issuing this order? I mean, there was a dissent, a strongly worded dissent from Sotomayor, but there was no reason given for the opinion.
It does seem strange, I think, for the Supreme Court to intervene in such an important context and to disrupt what the carefully sort of reasoned lower court opinions had found. But unfortunately, it's not that uncommon when the Supreme Court issues orders on what is known as the shadow docket. So these are cases that come up to the court on an emergency basis without full briefing and oral argument. At times, the court will just issue these unreasoned orders. But I think that there is very good reason to be really skeptical and even critical of the court's practice of doing this, right? Kind of the essence of the judicial sort of role is giving reasons for decisions. And the Supreme Court, I think in many ways, is not actually complying with those dimensions of the role if it doesn't explain what the lower court got wrong in a case like this one, where the stakes really couldn't be higher for the individuals involved.
Leah, I am interested, if you can do it quickly, in how this might affect or what it might tell us about the court's rulings in other important upcoming cases like the one around national injunctions. And then I do want to get in Camilo here as well. But go ahead, Leah.
I'm not sure it tells us anything about what they're going to do on birthright citizenship and nationwide injunctions. It does, however, I think, greenlight the Trump administration's disturbing pattern and practice of not complying with lower court orders. This is the case where the administration is alleged to have violated the lower court's order at least twice. And that is the order that the Supreme Court, without explanation, just granted the government relief from.
So let's bring in Camilo. Camilo, when people are sent to places like Djibouti, like South Sudan, other countries, Panama, Costa Rica, that the U.S. has asked to be able to send deportees to, what happens then? They're not expected to stay in these countries forever.
Well, it really depends rather on the country. For example, in March, when the U.S. deported more than 200 alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador, that country in Central America, imprisoned them at that notorious mega prison known as Sacot. They are still held there, basically incommunicado, without access to lawyers or calls to family. But in January and February, the administration also deported African and Asian migrants to Panama and Costa Rica. They were temporarily held in hotels and other facilities, but have since been released, and many of them have returned to their home country. So it really depends on the country, and these agreements have been really secretive in nature, so we don't know the exact details.
There's no plan to have any kind of due process for all the men sent to El Salvador, to that prison, so far?
Right now, they have no legal recourse to challenge their detention.
All right, Camilo, thank you so much. And Leah and Kate, thank you too. That was today's By the Way.